have some familiar faces here.
Well, I'm not sure where they are.
There they
Wait
are.
a minute. Oh, it's still Sunday.
It is still Sunday.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't feel like it.
It doesn't
anymore.
feel like Sunday right now. No.
Dave Wilson, Republican strategist and former Democratic Party chair of the state of South Carolina. Trav Robertson here. Thank you for coming in. I know you've been doing a lot of talking today, and that's not going to get me any. That's not going to slow down.
We're going to be doing a lot of talking,
anymore.
I think, all week long.
A
So yeah,
long time now.
Yeah.
There was so much there. But the name we hear, of course, Kamala Harris, gets the endorsement. You say that already movement is being made by delegates in each state to move towards that.
Well, as I walked into the studio tonight, I was on the phone with Chairwoman Crystal Spain of the South Carolina Democratic Party, just making sure I didn't get ahead of her. But tonight, the delegation that will represent our Democratic Party in South Carolina to the Democratic National Convention in a couple of weeks voted overwhelmingly to offer all of our delegates and our support to the Vice President and her bid to become the next President of the United States.
This is part of a process that we want folks at home to be able to understand. You went to the polls back in February. You had a chance to vote. The voter turnout from the Democratic primary was paltry at best, maybe 175,000.
That was about it, yep.
And that was a statement, I think, at the time that turned around and said, Brian, that President Biden had the support of voters. They didn't really feel they needed to turn out. He was going to win anyway. He got 96%. It was a big turnout for Joe Biden, just as it had been a big turnout for Joe Biden in 2020 when it was a game changer. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I think the big thing that we're looking at right now is when voters go to the polls, that's the first step in a process to say this is who our preference is, but it then goes to an entire separate process within the party structure. And so that's what you're seeing exercised right now with the Democrats.
And I think it's important to talk about the fact that this is not just a Democratic Party, but also a Republican Party process. And at the end of the day, these processes have been in place for many, many years. It's evolved and changed based on television coverage. And it is important to remember that while Joe Biden had the majority of delegates, he was still the presumptive nominee because his name had not been placed into nomination at a national convention, and thereby he had not accepted the nomination. And so it changes the dynamic a little bit.
You mentioned 2020, Dave, a few minutes ago. I want to show a statement from Congressman Jim Clyburn. He was so instrumental in helping President Biden springboard to the White House back then in 2020. In a statement to Watch Fox News tonight, Clyburn saying, in part, it was a long statement, but this boils it down, saying, I've had the honor and privilege of calling President Joe Biden a friend for many years. When I endorsed then candidate Biden in 2020, I noted how I could think of no one with integrity and no one more committed to the fundamental principles that formed the foundation of our great country than him. And what the country is dealing with right now is, of course, a little bit of unfamiliar terrain, at least this late in the game. South Carolina, of course, playing that key role in the Biden presidency. Without the Palmetto State voters, may have never reached the Oval Office. South Carolina picks presidents. That's the phrase.
It is.
The Democratic nominee is certainly, well, out now, but the power of the vote here in South Carolina cannot be questioned.
Well, there's no doubt about it. We have picked the numerous presidents through our process, whether it's the Democratic primary or the presidential. But I just want to hit on something Congressman Clyburn said. You know, there's a saying that power is never given up. It's got to be taken away. And Joe Biden has spent his entire life working for the United States of America. And today, we saw a very selfless act when he gave up the presidency of the United States of America to run for office. And I think that we can't underestimate the value and importance of someone saying, I'm going to give up power, because we do not live in a kingdom. We live in a democracy, and this is a man who truly believes in democracy, and he demonstrated that today. And it only speaks to his integrity and his love of this country and our form of government.
I think you also have to take a look at how important South Carolina is, because 10 out of the last 11, or even 11 out of the last 12 now, Republican and Democratic primaries that have taken place, South Carolina has been the state to pick the nominee. Iowa doesn't get it right most of the time. New Hampshire doesn't get it right most of the time. But in South Carolina, we do. There are a lot of reasons for that. We're a smaller media market. It's easy to get just across the state in a series of hours. there are a lot of people already connected into a political process. So when you think about this at home and you think about all of the elections that we've been doing over the last several months, you begin to realize very quickly how important your voice is in this process. And when we think back to things like the primaries that we just had back in June, and you see a turnout of 13%, think about it from this standpoint. That'd be like you living in your neighborhood and you voting and all of your neighbors around you not voting.
Right.
The voting process is so vitally important, and your voice in the process is key to the maintaining of the democracy, as we're going to be talking about.
And our place, Republican and Democrat, in the nominating process.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think right now you've got a very weakened Democratic Party. You've got a person who has been running for the better part of the last couple of years very heartily, trying to win that nomination, is on the cusp of it, and then he backs out. So there's, again, as Antoine said a moment ago, you've got number 2 who's now sliding into a number 1 slot. It's kind of like, is your backup quarterback going to be good enough to carry the ball and get the ball across the finish line and be able to score for the Democrats? It's going to be weakening, but at the same time, you're talking about the fact that you've got a female presidential candidate potentially on the top of the Democratic ticket again. That is a historic measure. Will she be able to do what needs to be done, not only for the presidential run, but more importantly, the down ballot races as we start getting into all of the other races for the House and the Senate?
President Harris is going to unite the Democratic Party, and she's going to have a successful 8 years as President of the United States of America.
You already endorsed it? She's already president now?
That was Freudian.
Oh, Freudian slips. Okay.
November.
But the truth is this, is that this is an exciting opportunity because people are going to see a convention that actually does something instead of just the perfunctory television hour. So this will be one of the most watched conventions in the history of the United States of America. She's got an exciting opportunity. Who knows who's going to be the vice presidential pick for her? There is going to be a lot of excitement around President Harris's campaign.
It has been 56 years since the 1968
in
Chicago.
Also
in Chicago.
History does repeat itself.
So we're at a repeating point of history at the moment where you're going to have Kamala Harris most likely going to end up being the person who is going to be leading this ticket. There could be other folks, but most likely with the endorsements that are already coming in, the moves that are being made by states, most likely it's going to be Kamala Harris. And in that particular case, the debate that starts happening on the floor, the things that go on in Chicago are going to really give them an opportunity to be able to showcase whether or not the Democrats can pull this off in 2024. I don't think you're going to see an RFK. Okay, so the way that it all breaks down, when you think about this, we go back to the Electoral College. Yeah. It takes a certain number of electoral votes to be able to win. You will be, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, it's a winner-take-all.
Yep.
South Carolina is most likely going to go Republican. It's going to be considered a red state. In that particular case, that doesn't mean those of you who are Democrats don't show up. You need to be showing up because there's down ballot races as well. But when you look at it from that standpoint, the states that really matter are going to really begin to play an effect, I think, on what the Democrats choose to do when you look at it from who the VP pick is going to be. Well, because they're going to have to start looking at states that are going to be swing states for the Democrats.
And you're really just talking about 13 states. I mean, and so the question is, are we talking about the governor of Pennsylvania? We're talking about Roy Cooper in North Carolina. We're talking about Andy Beshear in Kentucky. And then you've got Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. So there are a couple of states there that are going to probably weigh heavier in this process, but I really think that maybe he gets one vote out of Maine. I think Kennedy now hurts Donald Trump as it relates to a third-party race.
It all depends. It depends upon how people choose to view Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris, as a candidate, couldn't get through South Carolina.
That's President Harris to you.
Vice president at the time, or candidate at the time, could not get through South Carolina on her own. It would ended up being Joe Biden who ends up winning South Carolina in 2020. there's the real question that exists right now, whether or not a presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, can pick up the votes that she's going to need and build what needs to be done for the Electoral College.
The gravitas around winning a nomination or being a nominee is a heck of a lot different than that of a vice president or a potential candidate.
If you want to stay up to date with this story and much more, subscribe to our Watch Fox YouTube page. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update.